price manipulation that's taking place right now. As we've covered many times before, there's a lot of manipulation taking place when it comes to the price you pay at the gas pump. Now, the very businesses that claim that they're super gung-ho for the free market don't actually really like the free market, because that would mean that they'd have to compete. And in some cases, they might have to lower prices to compete with competitors, and that might cut into profits, and they don't like that. So a perfect example of that is in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where a number of gas stations are suing one gas station for having prices that are just too low. So let me give you the details. Newsweek reports that court documents name companies that operate nearby BP and Shell gas stations as plaintiffs in the case. Both are demanding $80,000 in restitution, an amount based on the 40 days they claim Woodman's market in Waukesha has been keeping prices too low. So just to give you an example of what they're suing over, what's the price difference here? As of Saturday, last Saturday, just a few days ago, the average price for a gallon of gasoline in Wisconsin was around $3.93, according to data from AAA. Woodman's currently offers gas at $3.59 a gallon based on listings Newsweek acquired from Gas Buddy. BP and Shell locations in Waukesha listed prices of $3.89 to $3.99 a gallon. Listen, I live in California, so I look at those prices and I'm just like, I'll take the highest price that's listed there, okay? Because we're paying $6 a gallon. Mostly because we have added taxes to what we pay per gallon. But nonetheless, it's not about California, it's about the free market here and how it's being manipulated. Woodman's has defended its prices in light of this lawsuit, saying that its prices are set to compete with Costco, just 6 miles away from them. And they say that this Costco is their primary competition. Gas Buddy listings show that Costco in that area is selling gas at $3.49 per gallon. The company has counter-filed against the suit, seeking its dismissal, and they absolutely should get the dismissal that they're calling for. What grounds is there to go after a gas station that has decided to, implement prices that would be competitive? Isn't that what the free market is supposed to be about? It's just mind-blowing to me that these gas stations would do this, that they would sue another gas station for having prices that they deem far too low. I mean, isn't this how the free market is supposed to work? You're supposed to have better service, a better product, better prices. But if your prices are just too good and it's cutting into the profits of surrounding businesses, surrounding gas stations, well then that's unacceptable. Another way that manipulation happens, and we've talked about this on the show so many times, has to do with the so-called OPEC plus cartel, right? These are the oil producing countries, and they get to manipulate the price of what you pay at the pump by essentially withholding production intentionally to lower the supply of gas. And Saudi Arabia is definitely guilty of doing this. In fact, they bragged about doing this, and I'll show you the evidence in just a moment. But before I do, I just want to note that Saudi Arabia is very salty about the fact that people are criticizing their government for manipulating gas prices. They claim, no, we will not stand for that. We have not done anything wrong. In fact, it's the Houthi rebels, the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, it's their fault. So look, there's a kernel of truth to that, but most of it is BS, and I'll debunk it. First, their claim. The state-run Saudi press agency quoted the Saudi Foreign Ministry as saying that the kingdom, quote, declares that it will not bear any responsibility for any shortage in oil supplies to global markets in light of the attacks on its oil facilities. And again, they're blaming these attacks on the Houthi rebels, which they're of course fighting in Yemen. On Sunday, Yemen's Iranian-backed rebels launched one of their most intense series of attacks targeting the kingdom's oil and natural gas production, sparking a fire at a petroleum distribution center in the port of Jeddah, the country's second largest city, and disrupting production at a petrochemicals complex in Yanbu on the Red Sea coast. Okay, so that seems pretty serious. how much of a disruption was there? Was this permanent disruption? Are they still trying to figure out what to do about? No, it wasn't permanent. The overall extent of damage at the installations remains unclear. The Saudi Energy Ministry acknowledged a temporary drop in oil output at the 400,000 barrel a day Yanbu site without elaborating. And maybe he didn't want to elaborate because their argument that they've done nothing wrong here is BS. Because this attack happened over the weekend. There was a temporary drop in oil and natural gas production. And literally starting 2 years ago, they were bragging about intentionally, withholding production in order to see a spike in prices, right? You ensure that there's less supply, especially at a time when there's increasing demand. And that means the value of shares for the stocks will do much better. You're gonna make more profits, more money. It's intentional manipulation. And it's not just Saudi Arabia. Other oil producing, natural gas producing countries do similar things because they can, right? They can just artificially manipulate because they get to decide how much they produce. And so I wanna go to this video. This is from January of 2021. Okay, this wasn't last weekend. This is from a year ago, more than a year ago, where the Saudis were bragging on the international stage about intentionally keeping production low. Let's watch.
Saudis shocking everybody and announcing a 1 million barrel a day surprise cut. The Saudi minister, Prince Abdulaziz, joked at the beginning that he had a surprise for the meeting, and he wasn't kidding. So they're coming out, they're cutting by an additional 1 million barrels a day. Now, others will be increasing production, but oil is soaring right now. Oil stocks are soaring right now. Nobody saw this coming. I mean, OPEC generally, there's leaks all the time, and we tend to report on things that are being whispered about. It's a lot harder to do that virtually, Kelly. We are seeing the price of oil, which is up 5% right now. The XOP ETF is up 8%. The XLE is up 6%. Some of the more heavily shorted names up 9 and 10% as well. So the Saudis doing this unilaterally, meaning they did it on their own. They called it basically a gift to show solidarity. And in fact, the Russian minister called it a New Year's gift and actually briefly smiled.
I love that video because again, it perfectly summarizes what Saudi Arabia was bragging about on the international stage, January of 2021. And while you hear the news being summarized for you, what do you see on the screen? You see the stocks for various, gas companies, fossil fuel companies. You have ExxonMobil. You see how well they're performing in the stock market in response to the news. Listen, sure, we can sit back and we can get mad at Saudi Arabia for doing what Saudi Arabia would do, right? Of course they would. If it means that they're gonna increase their profits, of course they're gonna do this. This is how it works. But what we should be really upset about is the fact that at this point, in this late juncture, we're still dealing with dependence on fossil fuels. When we've had decades of terrifying reports from environmentalists indicating that if we don't get off this dependence on fossil fuels, we are gonna deal with extreme weather conditions, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, all of the disastrous weather events that we've been noticing, okay? And on top of it, when we have this kind of war between Russia and Ukraine, when we have these types of, international relations, it's also going to put us at a significant disadvantage. And then couple that with the fact that we don't have a nationalized system for natural resources in America. We just rely on the whims of private corporations that have one thing in mind and one thing in mind only: maximize profits. We would have been in a far better position if instead of giving subsidies to oil companies, instead of focusing the vast majority of our energy on continuing the reliance on fossil fuels, if we had just focused more on developing renewable energy. I mean, we keep talking about, not we, but the US government loves to talk about China being such a threat. And it's because China's a competitor to the United States. And China gets it. They've dedicated a lot of investment into solar panels. What has the United States done? Why aren't we manufacturing solar panels? Why aren't we creating jobs within our country that would, propel us closer to renewable energy. I mean, it would be such a win-win. But no, instead, we're gonna remain reliant on a system where you have all of these shady-ass countries and companies that get to manipulate the market however they want. Why wouldn't they? If it means more money in their pockets, they're gonna do it. It's just gross. So of course, I don't believe anything Saudi Arabia has to say, but we should already be at a point where Saudi Arabia doesn't even matter when it comes to energy. OPEC plus countries don't matter when it comes to energy. I want to get to a place where our reliance is more based on renewable energies, where we don't have to kowtow to all sorts of weird authoritarian figures to ensure that there's enough oil and natural gas production.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.